welcome. Let's remember that it was written by an immigrant, someone part of a frontline community, someone who really knew what welcome to the stranger meant. Try a little different, and if you're just being shy, now might be a good time to stand up if that's something you're moved to do. Rise up on your spirit. Come, come, whoever you are.
I'll see you all out on the streets tomorrow. Since you're here tonight at this Interfaith service, I expect I'll probably see a lot of you at the Interfaith gathering on 58th Street, marching with the Interfaith contingent. Although a lot of you look young, so maybe you'll be in the student group that's over in a different area, or maybe some of you are here local from New York, and so you'll be in the New York borough area over here. Or maybe some of you are union members, and so you'll be over there in the union member area, where things are neatly delegated into their box, which I certainly recognize as being organizationally efficient, and I think it will lead to a good, efficient event tomorrow. But I feel called to remind you of something in light of that organizational efficiency, something that I'm sure you know in your hearts already. You are not a demographic. You are not a human resource in the strategic calculations of an NGO. You are a person. In the tradition that I come from, Unitarian Universalism, we organize our faith around 7 principles. And the first of those principles is that we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And often when we talk about that principle of the inherent worth and dignity of every person, we talk about it in the context of rights and in the context of equality. And so we focus on that dignity aspect of it, that inherent dignity of every person, that it makes them worthy of having rights and having equality. But there's also sort of an affirmative side of that as well that we don't often pay attention to. That side of the worth of every person. Something that we all certainly would agree upon. Everybody who's going to be marching tomorrow would say, oh yes, we all agree with that notion. But it's something that we often forget to affirm, that we have worth as an individual. And that is a positive thing. It doesn't just mean that yes, we have some use. To really affirm the worth of a person is not to look at a sort of list of boxes here and say, well, do you fit into this box? Because we need lots of those demographic folks. in our campaign here? Or do you fit into this category or that category? It is to recognize that you are a particular unique person with a unique story. And that story has power. And that story needs to be told. And that you are the only one who can tell that story. Like I said, this whole movement certainly believes in that. But it has a tendency to lose sight of it in an institutionalized, professionalized movement that focuses a lot on expert consultants and talking points and messaging and strategic calculations and focus groups. And if you listen enough to the focus groups and the experts, it can often feel like you're always the wrong person at the wrong time to be saying what needs to be said. So I think it's important to remember that we do have this unique story that needs to be told, regardless of whether it fits into the strategic messaging of a certain NGO. And as I said, you are the only one who can tell that story. And no one is going to necessarily create the space for you to tell that story. And in fact, because your story has power, there will be a lot of forces in our society that try to prevent you from telling that story and try to prevent you from realizing that unique potential that you hold. And there will be a lot of rules set up to discourage you from sharing that story and from realizing your powerful potential. And sometimes you have to break those rules and engage in civil disobedience. And having gone through that process myself, I've realized that in addition to being a useful strategy for movements and all the things that we normally talk about in terms of civil disobedience and why we do it and why it's important, civil disobedience is also a practice of affirming that inherent worth and dignity of ourselves. It is a practice of saying that I have a story and I insist on that story being heard. I insist on bringing my unique person, my personal story into the public discourse. Whether there is a place for it or not, I will create that place. I will bring my story into the path of injustice. And remember that I have that spark of divinity within myself that needs to be shared with the world. That I am here for a reason. The inherent notion in that principle of the inherent worth and dignity of every person is that we have a reason for being here. We have a reason for being who we are at this point in time. And yet you are not just an isolated individual either. You are also a part of something much bigger, deeply connected to something much bigger than yourself. The last of our 7 principles as Unitarian Universalists is that we affirm and promote respect for the interconnected web of all existence of which we are a part. We are a part of this much bigger web. And civil disobedience, in addition to being a practice of grounding ourselves in our particularity, is also a practice of connecting ourselves to our universality as part of this interconnected web of all life. Because it only makes sense to engage in civil disobedience not as an isolated individual, but as part of this larger whole. Because there will be consequences to civil disobedience. There will be negative consequences, and you, as an individual, will have to deal with some of those consequences. And when you weigh the cost and benefits of civil disobedience and the risks that you'll be taking, if you see yourself solely as an isolated individual, it doesn't make sense. Solely as an isolated individual, it makes sense to just protect yourself, to not risk anything, to just accumulate everything you can, just do for yourself and the people right around you. The act of civil disobedience is a practice of reminding yourself that you are a part of something much bigger. It's a practice of weighing those individual risks with these global rewards and benefits, and the benefits that will flow to that entire interconnected web of all existence. So it's a practice of grounding ourselves in ourselves, and it's a practice of uplifting ourselves and connecting ourselves with all those around us and all those who will come after us as well. And this is an important practice, one for building a powerful movement. It's a practice that we need more of at this moment right now. But particularly as young people, that practice of grounding ourselves in who we are, in that core of ourselves, in that spark of divinity that is within us, and connecting ourselves to something much larger than ourselves, connecting ourselves to that interdependent web, that's a practice that it builds the kind of resilience and interconnection that we're going to need for our future. Spent the last couple days here in New York listening to a lot of old folks who, to their credit, have been doing this kind of work and engaging on this issue for longer than most of you have been alive, for longer than I've been alive. And they've been doing good work, and they've been trying very hard to protect a livable future for us. But they haven't necessarily noticed that it's not 1990 anymore. And climate change is no longer a threat that we have to avoid at some point in the future. But it's something that's upon us, something that we're dealing with now, and we're going to have to keep dealing with more and more and more as our lives continue. And this generation is going to have to be a lot tougher than the generations that have come recently before us. This generation is going to have to deal with a lot of hardship. And it's going to have to find a way to maintain our humanity as we navigate this period of chaotic and intense change. It is now largely inevitable, right in front of us. We're going to need a strength, a foundation on which we can stand as we navigate that path. We're going to need that grounding in ourselves and who we are, that we value enough to put that into the public discourse. And we're going to need each other in very real